Hi, everyone. My name is Sadie McGuire, and I am an OT capstone student here at Children's Hospital North Shore. And today we're going to be talking about bedtime routine management. This is a topic that a lot of parents, especially of younger children, particularly those who have conditions like autism, or maybe they're just in their terrible twos, struggle with establishing a good bedtime routine that isn't just awful for everyone involved. Before we get into it, I wanted to do two things. The first is to remind you that if you watch this video, there is a post survey at the end, and you can either fill that out online through the link in the video, or you can ask your OT for a paper copy to fill out. Either way, it will be the same survey. But that's just really, really helpful for me as I evaluate this program and see how helpful it is for you guys and what I can do to make it more useful. The second thing is we're going to be talking a lot about regulation in this video. Even if your child doesn't have sensory processing concerns per se, I highly encourage you to go watch the sensory processing video that's posted on this YouTube channel as well, because that will give you some really good insights into some of the things that we're talking about, like terminology, what different types of regulation is. Um, I'll give you the shortened version in this video, but if you would like to know more or really understand what we're talking about, then go check out that video, which is also on this channel called Sensory Processing. So without further ado, we will get into it. First, I wanted to talk about the importance of good sleep. I think everyone kind of knows that sleep is important, but often we don't appreciate quite how extensive the effects of good sleep are, especially in a growing and developing brain. Um, Having a good night's sleep and getting good quality sleep without waking up in the middle of the night often and staying in that deep sleep is really important for a child on a number of different levels, from behavior to emotional regulation, how they can attend in the classroom, and having their brain develop in a healthy, normal way. They need a lot of sleep to fuel that growth, and make sure that they're meeting their milestones, that they're able to create memories. You store your memories, long term memories, while you're asleep. So that's really important for school performance and reasoning ability. Oftentimes, if you are not getting enough sleep or getting too poor of quality of sleep, your child might not look super tired and fatigued. They might be hyperactive and impulsive and over emotional and not be able to focus. And those are all signs that maybe the sleep routine is the problem. So I just wanted to point that out to emphasize how important it is to really prioritize the sleep that your child's getting to the best of your ability. Um, The National Sleep Foundation recommends that infants under a year old get about 12 to 15 hours of sleep. Um, Toddlers between 1 and 2 years want 11 to 14 hours of sleep. 3 to 5 years old needs 10 to 13 hours, and school age children ages 6 to 13 need 9 to 11 hours. So I just wanted to put that out there because I think a lot of times we hear, oh, 8 hours of sleep, that's good enough. That's kind of what we should go for. But that is not the case when it comes to children, because sleep is so important in their development and their memory formation and how they are storing those milestones and their brain development. So maybe take a look at how long your child is sleeping. If they're not getting the recommended number of hours, maybe try going to bed a little earlier. This is just to give you something to kind of compare for how many hours your child really should be getting. So, the first thing that you want to look at whenever you are trying to establish good nighttime routine, managing those tricky behaviors, is making sure that you're practicing good sleep hygiene. So, in the same way that we have personal hygiene, you brush your teeth, you put deodorant on your armpits, you don't wear dirty socks that make your feet stink, and that just keeps your body clean and healthy. Sleep hygiene are all the things that you do to make sure that you're getting good quality, clean sleep. Um, these can help establish a baseline for the routine that you build. It's not all about the child's sleep routine, and even though that is very, very important, and we're going to talk about that later, um, having these behaviors, these sleep hygiene behaviors, can help that routine to go a lot more smoothly and to help the sleep that they do get be more restful and of a better quality. So, some elements of sleep hygiene to think about, and some of these might seem like, oh, duh, I obviously that's important for sleep, but sometimes we take them for granted to such an extent that we forget to pay attention to really how much we are incorporating or not incorporating them. So the first thing is only sleep in the bed. The bed is for sleeping. It's not for laying in to play, eating a snack in bed, watching TV in bed. If you are not asleep or actively trying to go to sleep, you should be out of the bed. I mean, that goes for adults as well, but for kids, the only time they should be in their bed is sleep time. This helps us and them associate the bed with sleeping, and kind of create that associative relationship unconsciously with, oh, I'm in bed, I should be getting kind of tired. You want to pay attention to the lighting in the room. You want it to be appropriate with soft night lights if your child needs a night light. You want it as dim as possible, kind of maybe tucked in a corner, very soft and diffused lighting. You don't want any street lights beaming in through a window. If there's a clock or electronics in there that have those LED lights, the red ones that kind of blink in the dark or shine brightly in the dark, you want to pay attention to those. Any toys that they have that light up in the room or that might go off at night, that's another thing to look out for. Next is caffeine. I don't feel like many kids truly get a lot of caffeine. It's more adults that have to pay attention to when you're drinking caffeine. But if your child has drinks that contain caffeine, make sure that you're giving them to them plenty of time for it to be out of their system so that they not only can't fall asleep as easily, but they often wake up many times throughout the night and have a decreased quality of that sleep. Um, the kind of general guideline for kids is nothing after noon, especially if they're, and that's different if they're going to take a nap or anything like that. That will impact that as well. The fourth thing is screen time. No screens before bed. This is something that is really hard for parents and it's really hard for kids too, but it's very important. We're going to talk a little bit more about why it's so important later. But for now, suffice it to say, no screens before bed, and that can really disrupt your child's sleep cycle. Next is diet. In the same way that caffeine can kind of keep you wired, sugar or even too much food and having too full of a belly right before you go to sleep and snacking right before you go to sleep can really limit your child's ability to fall and stay asleep. And the next part of sleep hygiene is that routine that we were talking about earlier. It's so important to establish a routine where you sleep and wake at the same time every night, even on weekends. So if your child goes to bed at 7 o'clock on weekdays for school, they should probably be going to bed at 7 o'clock on weekends if you're able to do that, just so that their body can get that system of this is when we sleep, this is when we wake. Okay, so now we're going to talk about screen time. Screens stimulate a part of our brain that's designed to keep us awake, so it messes up our melatonin production. So, whenever your body starts to wind down, your body releases a burst of melatonin, which kind of signals everything to basically start going to sleep. And it makes you start getting that, oh, I'm thinking about heading to bed soon feeling, and it gets everything ready to hit the hay. But when you're staring at a screen, it really disrupts the production of that melatonin because your brain doesn't know that that's not daylight, essentially. So it doesn't know that it's time to wind down because you've got the screen flashing lights in your face or with bright light, even if it's not flashing. Um, Additionally, when a or adult is watching a video game or a movie, TV show, playing an app, the light from that screen and the brain power it takes to watch and attend to what's going on in the show is constantly firing an unconscious part of their brain and keeping them alert and aroused instead of starting to calm down and regulate. So that kind of goes back to the sensory processing lecture. If you watched that, Screens are a very arousing thing. Even though a child may be sitting still and quiet watching that screen, their brain is not still and quiet during that, and it is not regulating for a child. So just because they're sitting and being still, and you might say, oh, we're going to watch a little show before we go to bed to help everyone calm their bodies and wind down. Their bodies might be getting calm, but their brain is not getting ready to go to bed. In fact, it's the opposite. So I wanted to emphasize that because screen time is not a wind down activity for children. It is not good for them to watch any type of screens. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends any type of screens um, at least an hour before bedtime, but they did note that there are greater benefits when you turn it off at least 2 hours before you go to sleep. So, if possible, no screens, just quiet play starting an hour to 2 hours before bed. As far as screen time during the whole day, I did also want to point out that it's recommended that children under 2 have no screen time at all, and those between 2 and 12 only get an hour, and 12 and up, including us, should only be getting about 2 hours of screen time. So that's something that kind of hurts to look at a lot. I know myself, I'm on a screen for much, much longer than 2 hours, and I can kind of get stuck staring at my phone before bed. But it's good. It's something to be aware of that this is not really a healthy habit to engage in, and it really disrupts your ability to go to sleep and get good, restful sleep. I also included this quote from a study that was done. The study is quoted at the bottom if you're the type to be interested in that. That they found for children, excessive screen use has detrimental effects on social and emotional growth, including a rise in the likelihood of obesity, sleep disorders, and mental health conditions, including depression and anxiety. It can obstruct the ability to interpret emotions, it can fuel aggressive conduct, and also harm one's psychological health in general. So that's just something to be aware of. I think that even beyond bedtime routines, taking a look at how much screen time we're getting can be good, especially if you're having trouble managing behaviors in your child. It can be something to kind of assess and see if that might be a contributing factor. So I'm going to go on and on about how important a predictable routine is. Um, if you do the same thing to get ready for bed every single night, it will really help your child know what the expectations are, know when to expect certain things, what to expect, and it will help them eventually, hopefully, once they become a little more agreeable to a bedtime routine, be able to get some independence in executing that routine themselves. So, everyone's routine is going to be very different depending on what you've got going on in your family, what the dynamic is, and also what your individual child needs if there's any other conditions that might be impacting this. But here's an example one. So turn off the screens a couple hours before bedtime, like we talked about. Sensory play, this is another instance where I really encourage you to go watch that sensory processing video, not to beat a dead horse, but you want to encourage opportunities for proprioceptive and heavy work where they're pushing, pulling, snuggling. You can get them to push something heavy on the floor. You can snuggle with them in a lycra sock, a blanket tunnel, make a fort, give them squishes with pillows, things like that that are really calming and regulating. And you want to avoid alerting or dysregulating activities like crashing, jumping on things, crashing, spinning around. Things like that are going to be kind of going the opposite direction from sleepy time, bedtime, calm down time. Um, then brush teeth and take a bath. If your child is really, really aversive to these activities, like if they have sensory issues going on and they just can't handle having teeth brushed or really hate the bath and it's just a battle every single time, that is going to make them really, really dysregulated, and it's going to be hard to calm them back down to get them in that just right mindset for going to sleep. So it might be a good idea to consider doing these activities earlier in the day, like maybe take a bath in the morning or brush your teeth right after dinner. So you have several hours before bedtime for them to kind of calm back down. That's just something to consider when you're creating your own routine of if there's any activities that need to be moved so that your child has time to regulate before bed. Then, right before bed, engage in a quiet activity like reading a story, snuggling in a lycra sock, or under a weighted blanket, or rocking with your child. And that's gentle rocking, not crazy, alerting rocking. Slow, rhythmic rocking is really regulating. And if your child doesn't want to sit still to read a story, maybe they'll listen to a quiet, um, rhythmic song or a lullaby as they swing or rock. And that just really helps to bring them down, down, down to that just right zone for sleeping. Another important thing is to keep their bedroom and the environment that they're sleeping in consistent and make sure that all of the areas in that room are very conducive to good regulation for going to sleep. A lot of that looks like the sleep hygiene that we talked about, but all, with the removing the lights and things like that. But it could also include a white noise machine if mom and dad are going to be up still for a long time and they might be making a lot of noise and the it's easy to hear out of the child's room. A white noise machine might be something really important to invest in. Make sure you're moving the lights and the soft night light like we talked about. If you have um, a child who would benefit from a visual schedule or a dry erase checklist where they can physically check off the steps of the routine that they've done, it can help them to be able to execute the steps of their bedtime routine themselves. And also expectations. You can say, look, we're at this step now. We still have to do this, 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 and this, and then it's time for bed. And we'll talk more about visual schedules in a little bit later in the presentation. So, sleeping in your own bed. This is super common with kids, um, but it is something that is really hard to deal with because it's really hard to kick the habit of needing to sleep in bed with your parents or on the couch, anywhere but their own bed. It requires a lot of patience and a lot of consistency in making sure you're reinforcing the same expectations every single night, no matter what happens. If there's a bad night, keep going and being consistent. That is so important for kind of getting them back to sleep in their own bed. The first recommendation for this is to always make sure that your child actually falls asleep in their own bed. So don't let them fall asleep in your bed and then move them to back to their bed so they wake up there. That can be very confusing and alarming and anxiety inducing for them. How did I get here? I was snuggled up with mom and dad. Now I'm all by myself in my room and I am scared here. Um, and even if they're having a bad night and it's really not going great, try to not give in and say, okay, fine, you can sleep in my bed this one night. Because once you do that, it kind of takes 7 steps backward from the consistency that you've already built. One thing that you can try is fading, where they fall asleep in their room, but you are also in there. You might be in the bed with them, rubbing their back, giving them gentle squishes as they fall asleep. Then you slowly fade out your presence. So after they get used to that pretty well and they're able to handle that well, you might just lay in the bed and not touch them at all. And then you might sit in a chair next to the bed. And then you might sit kind of outside the room with the door open until eventually they're able to fall asleep without you in the room. Um, the final step also could be you say, well, I'm going to come check on you in 5 minutes. And you check every 5 minutes and say, I'm still here. You're still safe, whatever they need to hear. And then slowly extend that time until they're able to do it independently. If they do sleep all night in their own bed and they go to sleep in their own bed and they stay there all night long, then reward them. If they are getting to do it a little more consistently, you might do a star chart or a sticker chart where every time they do it, they get a sticker. And once they get a certain number of stickers, they get a high value prize. You want the prize to be something they really, really want. So they're super motivated to stay in their bed. If they keep getting out of their bed and want to sleep with you because of anxiety, such as fear of the dark, or they are super, super attached to you and they just get super anxious if they're away from you, it's important to address that anxiety. You don't want to just diminish it and say, oh, well, you got to sleep in your own bed, okay? If they're afraid of the dark, try night lights, making sure that the light that's in their room is a soft, soft light. If possible, you can kind of problem solve some things for that, as well as reassuring them that they're safe, you're in the next room, if they're too nervous to be away from you, and that's the reason they don't want to sleep in their own bed. If your child gets up in the middle of the night and comes in your room, mom, dad, whatever, I'm scared and gotta sleep with you, don't. I know it might be 3 in the morning and you want to let them in the bed, immediately get them up and walk them back to their bed. And that's why getting them to sleep in their own bed is such a hard uphill battle, for lack of a better phrase, because it does require a lot of patience and consistency. And I know it can be really, really hard to stick to your guns on something like this when there might be a lot of battles involved and a lot of back and forth. So these are just some general guidelines for managing those behaviors with wanting to sleep in the bed with you. You can always talk to your OT if you have any more specific or unique concerns related to your specific child. So, with routine and the sleeping in their own bed, but this is especially about routine, it is so, so important that you maintain consistency. If there's a blowout one night and everything is awful and your kid is kicking and screaming, the first night that you implement a routine and it goes awful and you're like, that was terrible. We're not doing that again. This did not work. It really takes a lot of time to establish that routine so that they start to see this is what we do every single night. This is how we do it every single night. And they start to get okay with that. The recommendation is to trial a consistent routine for about 3 weeks to see what is and isn't working. And if there are elements that aren't working, and you want to change or elements you want to add in, try slowly adding or taking away those elements. Don't just scrap it all and have a totally new and different routine the very next day, because that'll kind of undo a lot of the progress you've made with building that consistency and those expectations with your child. And if you've got a pretty solid routine, you've been paying attention to how your child is regulated, you've been reducing the screen time and making sure that they're getting a lot of soothing, calming input before bed to make sure that they're not hyper aroused, and it just still is not working. Here are some considerations or some options that you might think about if they are appropriate for your specific child. So the next few things that we're going to talk about are kind of in context of will it be helpful for your child. It's not perfect for everyone, but it might work for you. The first is clothes. If your child is really sensitive to tactile or touch, the clothes and PJs that they're wearing might be dysregulating them. They might not like them. Make sure that they fit them well and they don't have scratchy seams or any tags that are itching them. There are pajamas that offer a light compression. Compression is something that is regulating and calming. Um, some kids might like to sleep in just a diaper or underwear. That could be something worth trialing just to make sure that the clothes aren't the problem. Another thing is medications, which is might be something to talk to your doctor about if there's medications that you feel like might be impacting their ability to fall asleep and stay asleep. And you might want to change when you take those. Don't mess with any medications, obviously, without speaking to your doctor, but it is something to think about. Also, the screen time, as we've talked about, it sometimes you can feel like your child isn't on that much screen time, but start to keep a log of when they're on it and for how long. And it might surprise you. I know I would hate to see a log of how long I'm on a screen all day. Sensory regulation, we've talked a lot about as well. You want to pay attention to regulation activities and consider implementing a sensory diet throughout the day. If your child has a lot of difficulties with regulation, if they have autism or sensory processing disorder, it might not be enough to try to calm them down an hour or 2 hours before bed. You might want to implement regulation activities throughout the whole day, which, if those are your challenges for your child, regulation activities throughout the whole day in the form of a sensory diet would likely benefit them for more than just their bedtime routine. And there is more information about that in the sensory regulation model. Also, as we've talked about, their diet, not just sugary foods and keeping them up all night because they're jacked up on sugar or they're too full and their tummy's not ready to go to sleep. Um, GERD or gastroesophageal reflux disease, heartburn, acid reflux, whatever you want to call it, that could also be a cause of poor sleep because you're laying horizontal and the reflux is able to come up and gravity's not holding it down. If your child is a snacker or is always saying, I'm hungry, doesn't really want to go to bed because they want more food, you might consider using a kitchen is closed sign after dinner and say, the kitchen's closed, that we can't have any more food till it opens tomorrow morning. And having that visual could be something that would be helpful. As far as physical items to trial, weighted blankets and compression sheets are often very helpful and calming for a child who's dysregulated. It is important to note that no more than 10% of your child's body weight should be in the weighted blanket. And with compression sheets and weighted blankets, you want to be sure that your child can safely kind of wiggle around and get out from underneath them from a safety issue and also because you don't want them to feel trapped. Visual schedules, like we talked about earlier, you can put actual pictures of the real life items that your child uses as at each step of the routine on a piece of paper. That could look like a picture of the bathtub, and then a picture of the toothbrush, and then a picture of a storybook. If they like to read the same story every day, put a picture of that story. And then you say, you could either cut those pictures out and then have them velcroed or sticky tacked to a board. So you say, okay, we've done this. Now we do this. Next, pick our next picture, and that's what we're going to do next. Or you could just have it printed out on a piece of paper where they just look at it and you get them to cross off what they've already done. This does help them to feel more in control of the situation and to know that what the expectations are. And as we talked about earlier, as they start to get a little bit more independent with bedtimes, you can give them more independence using that visual schedule because after they take a bath, they see the picture and they know time to brush teeth and they'll be able to brush their own teeth as they after they gain that skill. The next is social stories. So social stories are a way that we can teach children um, life skills in a way that they can understand, especially children who have difficulties understanding receptive language or when you're explaining a concept to them and it's just really not going through. You can use a social story, which is essentially a short childlike story. It's in brief sentences and it explains in storybook form why we do something. A lot of the actual storybooks that you probably read with your child or see in the store are really social stories. Um, they might kind of go like, Sadie likes to play in the mud, but when she plays in the mud, her hands get so dirty. Her friends don't like when she touches them with her dirty hands. So she has to wash her hands so she doesn't get mud on her friends. Something silly and simple like that. It seems silly, but a lot of kids, it helps them to understand why we do things and why it's important that they also do those things. You can create your own social stories online that you read to your child. You could print it off so they're not looking at a screen when you read it to them. But you can even use pictures and elements of your own child's actual bedtime routine in those social stories. Uh, at the end of the PowerPoint, there is a link to additional information and helpful tips and tricks and things like that. And one of those links takes you to a website that has some already made social stories that are just kind of general for nighttime, as well as websites where you can create your own. The next is a sound machine. The noise of a sound machine can be regulating, as well as, like we talked about, blocking out that outside noise and helping them to kind of tune out distractions and go to sleep. So, with that being said, that's all. And always remember to ask your child's OT if you have any questions at all about their sleep hygiene or bedtime routine management or things that they could try. Um, if nothing seems to be working, you can talk to them about what you've tried already. And your OT knows your child, um, any sensory needs that they might have, and they might be able to offer something that you haven't thought of. Um, Please don't forget to take this post survey. Please, please, please. I would love it if you would. It's very, very helpful for me. I can't even tell you how helpful. And there's also a hard copy at the clinic. That's the same version of this online if that's easier for you. In the link to the left, it includes helpful links and some more information if you would like to know more about any of the research that is out there about bedtime routine management or tips, tricks, things like that. If you need more information, you could start there. Thanks so much for listening.